In 1989, the Western world believed it had won the Cold War. Through Francis Fukuyama, it proclaimed the end of history. The United States seemed to be the sole superpower that would shape a rules-based international order, and its power would never be challenged. But history is not a fairy tale, and the story didn't quite go that way. I'm Jeff Rich. This is the Burning Archive. Welcome to this video, which is part of my history reading guide to the post-1945 world order that you can get by becoming a paid subscriber at jeffrich.substack.com, and the details are all there for you to join up. I'd love to have you as part of the Burning Archive community. And it's based, my guide is based on the masterly history of the rise and fall of global empires since 1400 by John Darwin after Tamerlane. So let's return to the story of America's unlimited empire and its unipolar illusion. In 1989, when Mikhail Gorbachev, president of the Soviet Union, offered peace to conclude the Cold War, Francis Fukuyama dreamt big for America. The Cold War would become a frozen conflict and history would end. The USA's liberal genius had solved humanity's political problems. American-style democracy would go global, if necessary, carried with high-powered, AI-steered explosives. American culture would capture the world with the World Wide Web. The partition of Eurasia by the USA after 1945 was now old news. The Washington gang seized their chance to run the world from the White House Situation Room. The Unipolar Moment had arrived. America could do anything, even make its own reality, as Karl Rove infamously said. The USA had become the unlimited empire, or at least so it seemed. The dream soon turned sour. The opposition quickly grew. Power slipped from the wizard's grasp. The shadow of Tamerlane's failure fell over the United States. As Darwin wrote in 2007, before the idea of the multipolar world became popular, if there is one continuity that we should be able to glean from a long view of the past, it is Eurasia's resistance to a uniform system, a single great ruler, or one set of rules. In that sense, we still live in Tamerlane's shadow, or perhaps more precisely, in the shadow of his failure. 2 decades later, the truth of this long view of the past has been vindicated. But in 2007, Darwin's skepticism towards the permanence of one set of rules was rare. I recall myself from many discussions in university and government circles the near complete consensus that believed in 5 tenets of the unipolar Church of American supremacy. American pop and the internet had created a global culture. The sole superpower had revolutionized military affairs. Its style of politics had made the world safe at long last for democracy. Its banks and technology firms had defined a new economy of bits and dreams. Finally, its leadership had entrenched the Atlantic Republic as a forever Reich through its self-defined single set of rules, the liberal rules-based international order. None of these tenets are unquestioned today. The unipolar illusion looks like grandiose American bunkum today. But from the 1990s, its geostrategists pursued this strategy of full-spectrum dominance with ruthless zeal. The collapse of the other pole of the bipolar world also led to a mass formation effect among Western intellectuals. The West had won. The West was best. The West had all the contracts and appointments. The diversity of ideas in the policy community and the academy narrowed. The infinite conversation of history did come to an end, at least in the newly expanded universities of the West. Intellectual debate forgot the culture of civil disagreement. Kettman prevailed, as Czeslaw Milosz described it in The Captive Mind. People got by repeating regime talking points. They made money by doing work for the national security community. Journalist historians like Anne Applebaum crowded out insightful students of the rise and fall of empires, like John Darwin. So in 2007, Darwin's speculation that American power might have limits was rare. Yet he was not alone, nor was he the first. One brave American international relations scholar, Christopher Lane, renamed the unipolar moment the unipolar illusion in its infancy in 1993. In The Unipolar Illusion, Why New Great Powers Will Rise, he described the then still relatively modest strategy of preponderance. This strategy, he wrote, is not overly aggressive. The use of preventive measures to suppress the emergence of new great powers is not contemplated, or at least not yet. It is not, in other words, a strategy of heavy-handed dominance. Rather, the strategy of preponderance seeks to preserve unipolarity by persuading Japan and Germany that they are better off remaining within the orbit of an American-led economic and security system than they would be if they became great powers. The strategy of preponderance assumes that rather than balancing against the United States, other states will bandwagon with it. 30 years later, we have witnessed the most catastrophic consequences of such bandwagoning among Western elites. Western leaders threw the rules of international order out the window after 2022, following the intensification of NATO's war against Russia in Ukraine. A state power, likely the USA, sabotaged the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and Germany's energy supply. Bandwagoning led to, in Emmanuel Todd's phrase, the assisted suicide of Europe. As an aside, Lane also laid out the real differences between the rival factions in American foreign policy that has so confused people in assessing whether Donald Trump will be a peace president opposed to the neoconservatives. Biden pursues a strategy of preponderance by persuading allies to stand in the line of fire for the USA, including persuasion through covert operations and dirty wars all around the world. Trump pursues a strategy of heavy-handed dominance with open threats, bluffs and bluster, and more targeted business as usual with covert operations and dirty wars. Lane's 1993 article also supports an interpretation about the end of the Cold War. The USA never did end the Cold War. It just moved on to one of its favoured frozen conflicts. Lane wrote, "In effect, the strategy of preponderance aims at preserving the Cold War status quo, even though the Cold War is over." Or at least so we said. The concluding section of John Darwin's After Tamerlane that looks at the post-1945 world order is titled Unlimited Empire, and note the question mark. This video is part of a guide to that post-1945 world order that you can get by signing up at jeffrich.substack.com. Sign up to my weekly book recommendations and insights about our changing world, and become a paid subscriber and get the bonus gift of my guide to the post-1945 world order. His section begins with the American response to the end of the Cold War. Darwin does not view the post-Cold War era as a Pax Americana, an era of liberal democratic peace. Instead, he saw an era of global American expansion, a real end to the Cold War, or a genuine peaceful order would have stymied American ambition. To end the Cold War with a peace rather than a frozen conflict would have stopped that expansion. It would have crossed the interests that relied on endless war. Critics call these interests today the media, academic, military, industrial, congressional complex. It is the strongest, most cohesive cluster of power in the fractured American Republic. Outside America, and especially Europe, the world wondered in 1989, would America retrench its undeclared empire? Would they follow Mikhail Gorbachev's example in dissolving the Soviet Pact and the Soviet Union? Would they do it with less haste and fewer mishaps? Darwin kicks the story off. The great forward movement of American power and influence after 1945 would not be reversed. The Cold War had been the great age of American expansion, the vast new scale of American trade and investment, and America's dependence upon imported products, especially oil, made it just as important as at the end of the Second World War to have a dominant voice in shaping the rules of the world economy. The geostrategic revolution brought about by air power, satellite technology, and nuclear weapons affirmed even more forcefully that American security was a global, not a hemispheric matter. Thus, the American response to the end of the Cold War was to see it not as the chance to lay down an imperial burden, but as a meta-historic opportunity to shape the course of world history. What happened next? Challenges emerged, confidence waned. The swelling resentment at the burden of war led Darwin, in effect, to predict the Trump phenomenon. But in 2007, Darwin remained cautious about game theories that asserted an inevitable correction of the imbalance of a unipolar world. In 1993, Christopher Lane was more brashly confident, as political scientists are wont to be. He argued that the unipolar moment is just that, a geopolitical interlude that will give way to multipolarity between 2000 and 2010. His prediction was based on the game theory beloved by so-called realist international relations scholars. States balance against hegemons, even those that seek to rule by soft power, not force. The prediction seems stunningly accurate if you test it by the date of President Vladimir Putin's famous declaration of multipolarity at the Munich Security Conference in 2007. But John Darwin in 2007 made some more cautious predictions, was not so sure that the unipolar world was over. And the reasons for them are based not in theory, not in brutal realist oversimplifications, but in the complex empirical stories of a long view of the past. To learn how John Darwin more wisely read these changes of a multipolar world, please go to jeffrich.substack.com and there become a paid subscriber so you can get my reading guide notes to the final section of Empire Denied, John Darwin's After Tamerlan, and make up your own mind about whether America has reached the limits of its empire, whether the unipolar moment was a unipolar illusion.